a 6-foot-long dolphin, like, really not that cool compared to a 55-foot-long fin whale, you know? Like, then I started calling institutions up and down the East Coast and saying, I want a large whale, do you have one? May I have it, please? I then contacted the Seacoast Science Center and I said, I'd really like to have your whale. And they said no. And I said, please. Yeah, so they agreed to give it to us. And then Andrea and I went out and sort of looked it over at the beginning of last summer to kind of make sure that it was in the shape we thought it was and that it was a doable reconstruction. I think Andrea and I both came back from that with very different perceptions. For me, it was like, oh man, we have like almost all the bones, and some of them are even complete. And I think Andrea was like, we don't have all the bones, and most of them are not complete. So I packed all these bones up in New Hampshire where they were into a 20-foot-long U-Haul and drove it over the span of 3 days by myself, which was kind of like I started to have conversations with the whale. Like we became friends. The thing that I was going to show you is that we have a bunch of vertebrae that show active evidence of infection. So these holes here and this extra kind of growth that's right here around the outside of that vertebral centrum, that's all necrotic, like bone infection, osteonecrosis. And so this animal had a very serious active infection in a bunch of its vertebrae. And that kind of bone growth, I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen in the span of weeks. That happens in the span of 6 months or 2 years. And so there is some thought in the marine mammal literature that when whales get hit by boats, which this one did, that these active infections are, interfering with the brain, that the animal's kind of going septic, sort of half zombie-ish already, which is why it doesn't get out of the way of the boat and the boat hits it. Whereas if it was a normal, healthy individual, maybe it would have not been hit by that boat. And these things are called neural arches that protect the spinal cord. And right here, so these go from small to bigger, this big. This one should be, this piece should be like that, should be about that tall. So what happened here was this animal was 40 years old-ish. It was a 40-year-old adult male when it died. Probably when this animal was 20, it got hit by a boat and that spine broke off, refused, rehealed. This heel, I mean, you can tell by the texture of this bone that this healed just fine. This animal did not, it was hurt, obviously, but that bone healing was perfectly done. There was no infection, and the animal kept growing. And you can tell that because of this, the surface of these bones kind of fits together really nicely and has these open pock marks. Just it's this kind of texture as opposed to this kind of texture. That's evidence of articulation of one bone with another, so basically forming a joint. So what happened was this process, which was up like this, broke off, rehealed like that. So like, imagine if you broke your arm and the doctor never said it, right? If it heals differently. And then as that animal continued to grow, that must have happened when the animal was a juvenile, because it physically changed size since then to the point where those two vertebrae started to form a new joint right there. So that's one of the fun things about getting a real specimen like this instead of, paying for a replica, which would be a cop-out in my opinion, is that these bones tell stories. This animal had a life. It probably made babies at one point. It's a 40-year-old adult male. I'd been an adult for 20 years, reproductively mature for 20 years. This animal did things in its life and got hit by boats, got bruised, got an infection, broke a rib here or there. Like, life happens in the ocean just like it does anywhere else, and we can actually read some of those stories that are written in calcified bone.